So the first job I got was actually cleaning rooms in a hotel. My father had gone to his friend and said, my daughter wants to work for you. I may have gotten an office job. But I just was too stubborn to accept that. I just said, no, I want to do it on my own. Facebook came, went public, and killed everything. They killed MySpace, they killed MSN. Any objective we had, they killed it. Yeah, Uber is a great example, right?
Yeah.
We always, like, whenever I think of disruption, I always think of Uber. Expedia, I don't know how many of you know this, once upon a time was a spin-off of Microsoft. I look for people who definitely work hard, and that goes with, I think, that high agency, you know, like sense of ownership. You're saying you're a product manager, but you really were like a project manager or whatever, which is great as well, but it's not for the role you're hiring for. Bigger companies also tend to be more political. It just takes one bad manager for you to, you know what I mean? So there has to be a little bit of leeway there where you have to kind of understand it, because the rest of the resume looks amazing, right?
Give a hands to Pooja for flying from Dubai to here. Thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you for having me.
So Pooja, I know you. Careem and Naren knows you because they picked you up from the airport yesterday. But who are you? And what are you doing? What you have done? If you can give a brief explanation to everyone.
So, where do you want me to start? Who am I? Such a deep question.
Let's get started with your childhood. And then, how was your childhood?
So, obviously, as you all can tell from my name, I am Indian by origin, 100%. Although, actually, you guys know 23andMe or DNA test? None of us are Indian by origin, 100%, by the way. I have like 0.03% Finnish in me as well. But yeah, so my parents actually were born, my mom was born in East Africa. In Uganda, and my dad was born in India, in Gujarat, and he moved to East Africa when he was 4 years old. So they're more or less kind of born and raised in East Africa. I myself was born in Canada and lived, I'm a bit of a mutt. I've lived all over the world. I've lived, well, not all over the world, but I've lived in, I was born in Canada, lived there, and then I moved to Kenya when I was little. My father got a job there, so from 4 to 14 I lived there. Spent a lot of my childhood in England, in London specifically, and then back in Canada, and then 13 years before, for 13 years I lived in the US, on the west coast of the US, and then I moved to Dubai 4 years ago. So a bit from all over the place.
Nice.
Yeah.
I mean, what was it like moving from Canada to a place like Kenya? Like, very different, like...
yeah.
And this was your pivotal years, like 4 years to 14 years.
Yeah.
Like, what was it like?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So for me, one of my earliest memories as a child was the first night in Nairobi in Kenya when we moved there. I remember being in the kitchen, and because I guess it's such a different time, right? Like you just made such a huge change in your life. 4 to 14 are those developmental years where you're kind of, you know, you're figuring out who you are and you're developing into a little person. And I went to school, to an American school actually in Kenya, international school. So I had a bit of an identity crisis because I'm this kid who's Indian origin, born in Canada, living in Kenya, going to an American school. And I didn't really know where I fit in, you know, it was kind of a bit weird. And then living in Kenya at that time, I was too young to really appreciate all the beautiful things that that experience gave me. And for those of you, any of you have been to Nairobi, to Kenya, it's not the safest place in the world, so you're always kind of looking over your shoulder. But yeah, I look back in my life and I think I'm very grateful to have that experience. I just wish I'd had it a little when I was a little bit older, so I could really appreciate it. Yeah.
4 to 14 years, I think we don't even know like what exactly we expect from a place like. And then after Kenya, you moved back to US?
Yeah, I moved back to Canada. Yeah, when I was 14. And it was also a difficult
And then
transition.
14, I think 14 you would have gotten consciousness, like, okay, now I'm back to Canada.
Yes.
So your 14 to the first time you got a job, like let's say you call school life in Kenya versus Canada, what was different, like if you go back and see?
Yeah, I think in Kenya, like I said, I never felt like I really fit in. I went to school with a lot of Americans and I just I wasn't American. I wasn't Canadian. I was Canadian, but I left when I was so young. I had this Indian. My parents actually had me go to do Indian classical dancing from the age of 4 to 14.
Nice.
So there was also this like Indian element of like very kind of.
Which dance form?
We did Bharatanatyam, Kathak, and Manipuri.
Oh,
Three,
nice.
yeah.
Nice.
Which if you ask me to do today, please don't, because I have no idea. But like I was very bad at it. My sister was amazing. But yeah, so we had this like, you know, fundamental, you have to stick to your roots and know what they are. And obviously you eat Indian food and all of that stuff, and you're exposed to the culture. So very, very different. So going back to Canada, it was just kind of saying, okay, now I was at 14 where I said, okay, I know I can restart, because I understood I didn't really have a place. So I thought, okay, I'll go back to Canada and I'll reset and I'll try to figure out how I can fit in to a identity, a culture there. And that's what I really tried to do my first year back.
As a child, like there's so many things. Like first thing is like you're going to a school to study, right? And then also you're fighting to be feeling like you belong in this group, like fighting that identity crisis. I mean, now you can look back at it and say like, okay, this was something.
Yeah.
But at that time, do you feel like anything? How hard was it, like going back to Canada and then fitting in? Because I don't know if you would remember your Canadian days, because you moved from 4 years to 14 years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. For me, and I think this is one, it's a really interesting question. No one's asked me that before. But I think that's something that's really made me who I am, because I saw it as an opportunity to reinvent myself. And I took it. I grasped that opportunity because I felt so disoriented, right? So I said, okay, when I go back to Canada, the school I went to, I made sure that I was going to make friends who I connected with, and I just put all my effort into that.
Got it.
And I've done that since then. Like every few years, I'll be like, okay, what is not working for me, and what do I need to reinvent? And it's funny. I just had that realization when you asked me that actually probably was the time when it started.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice. Cool.
It's like a therapy session.
A lot of people say like I'm a therapist, like in the session. But you did your schooling. You would have done your, your bachelor's as well in Canada itself.
Yes.
How, I mean, I don't know if you would see the difference in India versus Canada, but like if you can recall your bachelor days, like how was your college? Did you do master's as well?
I didn't do a master's. So interestingly, I did a bachelor's degree and I did a commerce degree. Back then, I'm old, so the internet didn't exist when I first went to college. It was just starting out. We had email, which probably none of you are aware of, used to be zeros and ones. So if you got forwards of images, they were all zeros and ones images.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that was my first year of university. So I did a Bachelor of Commerce degree, and I knew that I wanted to specialize in business, and I thought at that time that I wanted to do hospitality. So the program I did was hospitality related in business. And I actually did what they call a sandwich program, or a co-op program in Canada, where you study and then you take time out and you work, and then you study again, you work. And what I did there was unknowingly, and this is probably a pattern in my career, unknowingly I started from the bottom. So my parents had connections in the hospitality industry, and they were very much about, oh, let's help you get your first job. And I was very stubborn about it, and I said, no, I don't want to use your connections. I want to do it on my own. So the first job I got was actually cleaning rooms in a hotel. Yeah, so there was a summer job. I cleaned rooms in a hotel. It was a Four Seasons hotel in Toronto. And that was very interesting, and I didn't last in it very long. First of all, I sucked at it. I was terrible. And second of all, it just wasn't like bringing me joy. But I did it. And then the next job I had in the actual proper sandwich course was front desk, kind of, at a big hotel in Toronto, being a customer support at the front desk or reception. And then after that, the next job I had was sales and marketing in London. I was working for a big banqueting hall. And then after that, I graduated, and my next job was actually at a consulting company that specialized in hospitality. And so without knowing it, I'd kind of climbed the ranks in hospitality. Amazing. Just by the jobs I'd gotten, but not intentionally. Like, it was just whatever I got, I took.
This is very interesting, because it's very rare to see this kind of story from an Indian perspective, because I've not seen someone going from this place to that. It is also because, like, let's say in India, cleaning a room will be like a very low status job,
Yeah.
like, and people, I don't know why this doesn't happen. Like, do you have any hypothesis? Like, do you see, I mean, what's different in places like Canada or US?
I don't think there's a difference, to be honest, because you'll take the job that you're given. But at the end of the day, I think for me, I guess growing up, I was very stubborn in certain respects. And I felt like inside I knew that I was going to do something, but I wanted to be because of what I did. I didn't want it to be because somebody did a favor for me. And that's why when I had zero experience in the world, going to someone and saying, I'll work for you, they would give me no job other than the most bottom tier job. Now, if my father had gone to his friend and said, my daughter wants to work for you, I may have gotten an office job.
Yeah.
But I just was too stubborn to accept that. I just said, no, I want to do it on my own.
I mean, do you look back at it and
Regret it?
no, not regret it, but like feel proud of that decision? Like,
I do, because I think every experience has given me some knowledge. You know, every experience has given me an indication. Every experience has led me to where I am today, first of all. And I think early on, I really believe, like those of you who may have children or may have nieces or nephews or know children very well, like I think there's something, because I have a niece and nephew, I don't have my own children, but they were born a certain way. You know, their personalities were defined when they were young. And I think that was the same for me. Like I feel like I was that kid who was always going to do things their way. And it's to this day I'm that person. You know, I'm always going to do things my way. So I don't look back and think I'm proud of it in a way, but I don't wallow in the pride. But I'm grateful that it led me to where I am.
yeah, I mean, that's something that is fascinating to me. Just like from accepting a job like that to leading companies like Kareem, and now consulting so many companies. Like, life has so many things, right? So let's talk about them. Once you finished your graduation, what happened after that?
Okay, so like I said, the internet was just becoming very usable at the time. So when I graduated, I got a contract, like I said, at a consulting company that specialized in hospitality. Now, what I was doing for them was a bunch of research. And at that time, with the internet being accessible, I started researching on the internet. And as I was researching on the internet, I thought to myself, this is interesting. Now, don't forget, I'd gone through the ranks of hospitality at this point. I'd done different various jobs in hospitality, and I knew that the glory and the glamour of it was not that much. That was not what I was looking for. You know, hats off to people who work in hospitality. You have to have a lot of grit. But for me, it was something that I just was like long hours, late nights. It just felt like it wasn't necessarily for me at that point in time. And so the consultancy route was probably more, the office job type was more for me. Now, with that role and looking into the internet and seeing that this was something very interesting, I thought, okay, you know, what could I do here? And my boyfriend at the time, there's a dog fight happening. They can relate. My boyfriend at the time said to me, you know what, you should actually look into if you can learn stuff and so he said, you know, just do HTML, learn HTML. He's like, you can teach yourself HTML. So I said, okay, fine. So I taught myself HTML, you know, not a big deal. Okay, so then I basically taught myself HTML, and then I started looking into programs. I had just finished this intensive university program. I was in a rush to get out there and start working. I didn't want to go back to school. So at that time, there was no other programs out there other than there was a college near where I worked in Toronto, where I lived in Toronto, that was offering a 1-year program in e-commerce. And I thought, okay, I've done a BCom.
E-commerce, this is
e-commerce.
This is which year?
This was, so now you're probably 2001. I know, you're laughing, so I'm old.
No, I was 4 years old that time.
2001. It was a one-year
Oh,
program
crazy.
in e-commerce.
E-commerce,
Yeah.
like at that time.
At that time. So I had done my B-commerce at the university, and I said, okay, let me now do this e-commerce one, because I could swallow 1 year, but I couldn't go back to school for 2 more years, 3 more years. I was just in a rush to work and get going. So I took this 1-year program in e-commerce, and it was the best thing I ever did, because even what I learned there is even relevant today, believe it or not. I learned the foundations of ERP, SAP, you name it. I learned like all of the different elements that make up technology, even today, like for large organizations. And so I did that program, and I ended up graduating and did pretty well in it. And then I said, okay, now let me find a job in technology. And then I said, okay, now I'm going to use my contacts to get a foot in the door.
Nice.
I was done with like trying it on my own. So a friend of mine, he worked at a startup that was doing pretty well in Toronto. And so I just said to him, look, I have no experience. Can you just give my resume? And he did. And luckily, because of that, I got a job at a company called WebHelp in Toronto. And this company was super interesting because when I worked for them, they had just, they were doing pretty well. They hit profitability soon after I joined. I joined in a very junior capacity. I was supporting a team that supported their biggest client. They just hit profitability. We were literally on the cover of magazines all over Canada. And then I grew with that company. I got into more and more senior roles. I was with them for about 3 years. And then I actually went to open up their satellite office in the UK, in London. They entered into, I think I was telling you guys yesterday, they entered into a joint venture with a company here in India.
Nice.
And they went bust. We all ended up back laid off. I ended up back in Canada on my parents' couch.
First tech job and then got laid off.
Yeah, exactly. So it was such an interesting experience early in my career to kind of hit the peak and then go down low. And at that time, I didn't even know to ask for equity or anything like that. So it didn't really affect me that much. And also had my parents' home to fall back on. So it was just a very interesting experience early on.
And how long did you work there?
I was there for about 2 or 3 years.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I think then after you moved to, how long was this like after you got laid off and then you got the next job? How long was it?
It was
like?
a long time. So when that happened, it was probably about 2003 or 4. And it was a little bit of a bubble burst then. You guys are like, man, I don't even remember those years. I was so young. The bubble had burst a bit. So initially, I was very motivated to find another job. You know, I'd apply everywhere. And then eventually I started, waking up at noon and watching TV, and my parents were like, what's happening here? You need to get a job. And what had happened was one of our biggest clients actually at WebHelp was Microsoft. And so I worked with Microsoft headquarters, and they basically, my old boss from WebHelp, she also had moved to the headquarters, but she also worked with the team in Toronto. And through her, they heard that I was not working. So they contacted me and they said, hey, would you be interested to join us? At that time, Microsoft Canada, so again, this is going to date me, but do you guys know what portals are, internet portals? AOL was a portal, yeah. So one of the biggest portals was MSN, Microsoft Network. And in Canada, that was the biggest portal. And the second biggest portal was a portal called Simpatico. And that belonged to Bell Canada, which is the biggest telco in Canada. So they entered into a 10-year strategic alliance, Microsoft and Bell Canada, to offer tech solutions through Microsoft, and then the sales would be through Bell Canada. And so they said, will you join us and do our kind of like program management type of stuff with us? And I said, yeah, but I thought it was a little too technical for me because, again, I don't come from a computer science background.
But you did learn HTML back then, no?
I did learn HTML. I tried to do CSS too. For whatever reason, they said, let's give it a shot. So they accepted me, and I worked with them for several years.
More than a decade, around a decade, right?
Yeah, almost
you worked
a decade,
with Microsoft, yeah. I mean, this was year 2003, 2002.
around then, yeah.
How many of you were like less than 10 years? so crazy because at that time I don't know how many of us would know internet,
Yeah.
and you were working on internet products at that time.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
So, what was at that time working on products like you started with MSN, right? You
Yes.
said MSN.
Yeah.
How did you work? Like I do. Right now we have a lot of structure, but at that time, like, was it
Yeah.
different than how we work today? And
I'll tell you, it was different for two reasons. So when I was in Canada, there was a lot of, and in the program management role, as those of you who have that background, you know there's a lot of project management involved, but
Yeah.
also some technical know-how. So there was a bit of that, of kind of, I was responsible for like white labeling Hotmail before Gmail existed, guys. Hotmail was the #1 email service. So I was responsible for white labeling Hotmail for our partners. So really just understanding technically what needs to happen and then working with the technology teams in the headquarters at Microsoft in Mountain View. They were in a separate part of the Silicon Valley to translate those requirements so that they could execute on them. So if you really think about product management, it is kind of what product managers do.
yeah.
Because you go a little bit deeper than just the project management side of it. And then you are managing all your stakeholders and their expectations. So yeah, it's not too different, I would say, in that respect. It just wasn't called product management at the time.
I mean, right now as well, right? Microsoft's terminology of what program manager is and what product management is very, very similar
Yeah.
in that term.
Yeah.
But I just want to go in this zone when it's 2004, year 2004. In India, I think we were still riding Chetak. Bajaj Chetak was the primary mode of transport, like a scooter
Okay.
with 4-stroke, and it won't go more than 40-50 kilometers, even if you give race. So that was the biggest technology that we had at that time.
Yeah.
And you were working at that time for Hotmail, like. So it's so hard. So at that time, what was the vision of Hotmail? And I got. So at that time as well, like, were companies coming to you and say like, I need a separate email for
Yeah.
my company?
Yeah.
At that time as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So at that time, because we had the partnership with Bell Canada, we had to white label our experience for them. It was the first time I think we'd done that. So it was like just looking at it, because Hotmail essentially was acquired by Microsoft. I think it was an Indian developer.
Yeah. Sameer Bhatt.
Yeah, so we had it for a while at that point, so it wasn't like new code or anything, and we actually had a dedicated team that worked on it. But yeah, it was a lot of kind of understanding, really kind of pioneering a new path on how you take a technology that exists and do that. And this is for a partnership, right? The vision for Hotmail, I don't think the answer to your question is I don't think there was a vision.
Okay.
Because it was an innovation. Email was innovative. It's the first time you had like a UI that people could actually, it wasn't zeros and ones, like
Yeah.
it was groundbreaking. But when it came to consumer, people at the end of the day are evolving outside of their work life and they need different things and you have to stay on top of it. So with Hotmail, when Gmail came out, in fact, I remember I was there when Gmail came out. I don't know if many of you remember, but Gmail did something really smart where
Yeah.
they said invitation only, you know, like it became FOMO, as we call it
Yeah.
today, a FOMO thing. And overnight, I remember going into work and overnight we were like, oh shit. Someone's actually competing with us, you know, and we weren't prepared for it, and that was the beginning of when you start to see the end of Hotmail, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
I mean, right now, I am just digressing from
Yeah.
the topic a bit. But right now, the same thing is happening with Google, right? If you see like OpenAI
Yes.
coming up with products like ChatGPT and
Yeah.
GPT-3,
yeah,
and Google is feeling like, okay, someone's competing with us and
Yeah.
like they are competing really good.
yeah.
What is a lesson you will, from your experience with this Hotmail and Gmail thing, you see like Google should not do what Microsoft did at that time,
Yeah.
so that they don't like have another competitor like OpenAI coming for them?
Yeah, I think, you know, so all of these giants like Google, etc., Microsoft, Amazon, they get to a scale where they're competing on every front together, right, against each other. Everything is up for grabs. And a lot of their R&D and stuff they do behind the scenes is because they're thinking futuristically 3-4 years out. I mean, I remember Microsoft started talking about the cloud, and it was really early days, and I just thought no one's going to get this. But sure, now nobody doesn't know the cloud. Like everyone's, of course, you're going to store everything in the cloud. But I thought it was a concept consumers just aren't going to grab. But likely, there's a lot more R&D and a lot of forward thinking that these companies do. So I think a lot of these innovations, and I mean, AI has been stuff that Google, Microsoft, Amazon, everyone's been investing in, all the giants have been investing in for a long time, knowing that there's going to come a place when it's just going to become easily and openly available. And it really becomes the adoption race, right? Like who's going to get the product that's going to be adopted the most and can sustain the most. So I don't think that Google's or Microsoft's even today or anyone is really being complacent anymore. I think they're all aware of it, but it's just about which one is going to win the race, because they do know that, you know, people will gravitate, the general public will gravitate to the solution that's going to work best for them. And to penetrate that is even harder, because again, ChatGPT on everybody's lips. I personally use Gemini more. I find it much more valuable. But when I talk to the average person, I ChatGPT this. It becomes a, you know, like
I Google it.
I basically you end up. Once that happens, it's really hard to penetrate. So it's more of a race, I think, than them being caught off guard. It's more of a, hey, they've got their ears to the ground. They know what's happening, and then how do they expose the R&D they've done and make it publicly available?
Interesting. So what you're saying is, like, if you get the initial distribution right, it's very hard for a incumbent to come in, then let's say, okay, nice. Like,
I think that's the case for a lot of the giants, because they have so much of the users already. And users are fickle, right? But you know, this is why Google wants you to sign in with their Gmail across all their products, because that's your sticking point for them.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So I mean, people who are listening, like a founder, focus on distribution more. Like if you're competing with a very big clients. Now coming back to Microsoft, like you worked there for almost a decade, right? What all did you work on, and how was your experience like?
So I had a manager who called me a mutt. A mutt is like a mixed breed dog. I wasn't offended by it. I mean, people would be like, "Oh, that's awful," but she was right in that. I call it my tour of Microsoft. I worked in Canada for 2-3 years, and in that time, I kept being pushed by the headquarters in Seattle to come and work for them. So I had 2 or 3 teams say to me, "Come and move here and work for us here," and I kept saying no, because us Canadians, we don't like to move south of the border. We like staying in Canada. So eventually, you know, my entire family, my parents moved to the west coast of Canada. My sister got married, had 2 small children in the west coast of Canada, and I thought, okay, and I was on my own, so I said, you know what, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to move to the west coast. Seattle's only a 2-hour drive from Vancouver, where they live. And I said, I'm just going to do it, and I'll try it for a couple of years. And 2 years in Microsoft headquarters turned into something like
almost a decade.
A lot more years, but the reason being, because a big company like that, and I know like some of you are in big companies yourselves, like the Googles and the likes, there's so much opportunity to move around and try different roles and try different things. And back then, when I moved to Microsoft headquarters, again, product management was at this point a title, but it still wasn't very well defined until, I think, if I think back, probably until Google and Facebook really made it a defined term. Engineering had design under them and all of the other power. They would put a product together, and engineers love them to bits. I think they're the smartest people in the world. They would come up with these amazing solutions, sometimes overly complex, and then they would toss them back to product and say, now go get millions of users. And that was the product manager's role at that time at Microsoft. So I started to think about, well, how do I get millions of users on it? Yes, the Microsoft brand carries a lot of value. You can take it so far. But then I started to think about really what's going a bit deeper and thinking about psychologically what makes a user use my product and how can I make them use it more. And so at that time, because we were more kind of product marketers than we were product managers, I started dabbling in product marketing. And I started to kind of really try to understand the customer mindset. So that's what kind of took me through the tour, what I call the tour of Microsoft, but I kept coming back to product management.
Yeah.
Because I was like, there has to be a way that I can apply this to how we develop products.
So what you're saying, like, I mean, even now the definition of product management is not really defined, right? But at that time it was morely like, this is what we have to do. Here's a fancy deck.
Yeah.
This
Go
is
do
the tech lead, just go do that.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. That's pretty much what it was.
I think that's much better job to do rather than the current form of PMing.
Honestly,
for sure.
it's easier for sure. You can sleep better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. So, I mean, you worked on MSN. What was the scale of MSN at that time? Like,
I don't even remember the numbers, but it was massive. MSN UK was number one. MSN US, I think in the US it was the number one portal, if I remember correctly. In Canada, it certainly was. Yeah, it was massive
nice.
globally.
Okay. Because MSN is something I think the first portal people would have used would be
Yes.
like MSN.
Yeah.
My first homepage when I got the internet was MSN.
Yeah.
Like,
Because if you think about it, the PCs were everywhere.
Yeah.
Like most people had PCs. So your default is the MSN portal. Right?
yeah. If you can go a bit deeper, like how did MSN website, like, because it has, if I remember, like my first internet days, like it was, so one, before that, how I see transition of the first homepage of internet was, it was portals like MSN, Yahoo and everything.
Yeah.
Then it moved to like Google, just a search engine,
Yes.
right?
That's right.
Why do you think that happened? Like, because MSN made more sense. Like, first thing you see is like a lot of news, a lot of sports, and you can also search. Like,
Yes.
but on Google you can just search.
Yeah.
So it's a very counterproductive for a company to do that, because now you have so much space on this website
Yeah.
that you can sell for advertisement.
Yeah.
But for a company like Google, just said, okay, we don't need to do advertisement, just search engine.
Yeah.
Why do you think that shift
It's a
would
really
have
good
happened?
question. I've never thought about that before. I think portals died because essentially it was a way to consume. I think a few things happened together when I think about it. It was a way to consume the news. It was a way to consume content. It was the only way really to consume content on a large scale, on a large digital scale, I should say. I think it was the beginning of actually relevance to you. So I'm looking at my MSN portal and I'm seeing all news, whatever's relevant to everybody. It's not customized to me.
Yeah.
And then Google came around and introduced this idea of, with their data loops and all of that stuff, the idea that actually, no, we can give you whatever is relevant to you quicker. And then I think, and then it took off, but I think around the same time it took off, I want to say within a 5-year period, is when Facebook started to go mainstream.
Yeah.
And Facebook, now you've got a feed
Yeah.
that gives you relevant news and content.
Very interesting.
So why do you need the portal anymore, right? Why do you need to stop there, and why do you need that to be your front page?
Yeah.
You can either have your default of, okay, I'm going to look for something, therefore I'm going to look for it, or I'm going to open a feed that's relevant to me. I don't have to make any effort or kind of scan through stuff, you know?
Perfect. Very interesting. Like, what now, if I have to look at two things very important, you said MSN was doing two things.
Yeah.
First is search as well as a feed.
Yeah.
That was not very relevant to you, but
Yes.
it was a feed, like you
Yes.
can go and consume.
Yes.
Maybe it is similar for you, me, Ayush, Kanika,
Yeah.
as well, right? But Google came and said, okay, if you want to do search, just use us. And Facebook said, okay, if you want to go feed, there's a relevant feed just for you, so people don't have a reason to go back to MSN.
I think that could be a big thing. And also with Google changing the game in the sense that portals were advertising based, right? So their business model was, we get eyeballs on our portal and advertisers are funding it. Whereas Google changed the game where they said, just sell on us, you pay less and you get more targeted customers, right?
Yeah.
So you probably had a migration of advertisers be like, this is much more relevant to us because we can target our audience.
I mean, that's very interesting. So two things that I see. Looking back, we can see this pattern, like this is what happened. But at that time when you were there, can you see any hints of this like happening? Did you felt like, okay, this is going to be big? Is there any hint like you could sense, or you was like, okay, this is one day thing, it'll go away?
You know, honestly, no. Like it was such a. It's almost like asking someone when the iPhone, when mobile phones came out, did you imagine a world where it'll be weird if somebody doesn't have a mobile phone?
Yeah.
Like it was such a natural progression in a way. So I don't think that was the case at all. But I do remember when I worked at Microsoft, one of the roles I was in when I first moved to Seattle was, again, I'm going to really date myself. So who here knows like MySpace?
Yeah.
Okay. So MySpace was really taking off when
Yeah.
when I moved to Seattle. And we at Microsoft said, we're going to build a competitor. It's going to be MSN Spaces.
Yeah.
And it's going to be just, we're going to kill MySpace with it. And Facebook was just in universities at the time. And it was during that time where we were building MSN Spaces, which never really took off, to be honest. Facebook went public and killed everything. They killed MySpace, they killed MSN. Any objective we had, they killed it. Because their model was so different. So it was this idea of like, because at that time, I don't think there was, there was a lot of awareness of disruptive digital models coming in and really changing the landscape. Whereas today, we're much more savvy and we say, okay, that's a model that's going to disrupt how things are done today or how people are consuming technology today or whatever the case is. Disruption is a theme. Back then, disruption wasn't even a word. It was just innovation was happening, and people who had now access to the internet and had access to different modalities of accessing the internet, because again, mobile phones were starting to come up, not necessarily the iPhone at the time. It just was a time when so much was happening that disruption was just the norm, and you kind of reacted to it. You weren't proactively finding the signals as you do today.
Yeah. I mean, you have seen this much disruption happening, like from 2000 and like 2024, we are talking like 2-3 cycles that has happened.
Yeah.
I was like thinking that there's nothing that could disrupt Google or Facebook at that time, but now it's very different. Like you never think like a new search engine will disrupt it, but something else has just come up and it is just disrupting as well.
Yeah.
So basically disruption doesn't happen in the current form.
Yes, that's right. That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Right? It will happen in something that you don't know people want.
Yeah.
But once you put it in the hands of people, you feel like, okay, this is what people would have liked, right? Nice.
Yeah, Uber is a great example, right?
Yeah.
We always whenever I think of disruption, I always think of Uber. You didn't know you needed a car and you needed to see where it was and order it from your phone until you got Uber, and now you're like, Canada didn't have Uber till about 3 years ago. And I was like, every time I cross the border, I'd be like, what's happening here? Like, how are you guys surviving? So yeah, it's interesting.
Crazy. I mean, you have seen, I think I would say the peak of internet was 2008 to 2010. A lot of companies that are the biggest top 10 companies, majority of them were born at this time. What magic happened at this time?
It's a great question. If I were to guess, I'm not an expert in this, but if I look at the big companies, what they really figured out is how to use data at a personal grain, at an individual grain, to drive, two things. One, how to use data at a personal grain, a very individual grain, to almost manipulate humans to do what they want them to do, because now you have a device at your fingertips.
Yeah.
And now we have full access to you, and now we can use the data to learn about you, but also get you to do what we want you to do.
Yeah.
And those are some of the companies that really excited through there. And then there were also just really great innovators who came in and said exactly what you said. This is a problem people don't even know they have, and I'm going to introduce a solution that they can't live without.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, really great. So so many things that I think a lot of people who will watch this will take away. I'll come back to your experience. Like you also worked with Xbox Live, right? And Xbox. How many of you played Xbox? Like here, only. I think a lot of people have played.
Wow.
Only I haven't played.
You raised your hand.
I was just saying, okay, you can raise your hands.
Encouraging.
Uh, so when you started working on Xbox, this was year like 2009.
Ish.
9-ish, yeah.
Something. Maybe later. Yeah.
We used to play. I mean, I'm just comparing India so that people can get a context. Like at that time, you can just go play with 5 rupees and play Taken for 30 minutes, like Taken or GTA for that time. And you were building tech like Xbox. What was it like building? Because you have built products that people that are now very mainstream.
Yes.
But at that time, to even think about that product would be like such a big leap. Like, what was it like? I can't even know. Like,
So my role at Xbox was most of my career at Microsoft was in the internet side of things. And when I joined Xbox, I knew I wanted to leave Microsoft, but because a lot of the web products we were building were just Messenger and all of this stuff was just, we weren't able to succeed in it. So I strategically knew that I needed somewhere to leap from that had a lot of credibility outside of Microsoft. And Xbox is really the only consumer product I thought at Microsoft that I could have that platform. And that's why I joined Microsoft. My role at Xbox team at Microsoft, and my role at that Xbox team was actually not very product management focused. It was a little bit more about business strategy, specifically to do with avatars. Now, what's really interesting is I think your question is really interesting because that product also died.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm not the reason all the products died. I know it makes it sound like it, but I think about this a lot because at that time what we were doing is something that is now picking up again now today. And I think we're just too ahead of our time.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, avatars are like getting mainstream. Even now, I think 2-3 years it'll take to get it mainstream. Like, and you're doing it like when I was in 5 or 6 standard. Like, So we were doing like avatars that you can customize, that are your online presence on Xbox, that you can buy brands for. So if you're buying whatever you're wearing your brand, we would have like the actual digital assets and we would work with these companies and brander. So we found that business just wasn't taking off, and so eventually we killed it. And do you think it was because it was too early at that time?
I think now where we are today, I think it's because it's too early.
Yeah,
it was too early. I do think the gaming customer base, there were customers there, but it just wasn't. It needed to be mainstream for it to really drive a business.
Was it because that there were too few gamers at that time, or was it because that they didn't have a lot of money? They were good. I mean, a lot of gamers, but
micropayments. I think it was there were a lot of gamers then, just as there are now. But if you think about who the gamers were and who I assume still the gamers are, the kinds of games they play aren't the kinds that they need avatars or want avatars for. Like Call of Duty or whatever you have it, right? You don't necessarily want an avatar for that. And those avatars we had back then, again, they weren't as sophisticated as the avatars you might see today. They were still a little cartoony. Right? So you may have different expectations today, and now you might say, okay, now this avatar really represents me because I have more of a digital presence online, and I can make aesthetically, I can make it look and represent me much more, and therefore I'm going to invest in it because it'll show up in more places in my digital world. There's no Web3 then, there was no none of that, right? So I think that we had a big base of loyal Xbox users, but they were more interested in the kinds of games where avatars don't really necessarily matter, or at least avatars in that form.
And such a crazy thing, like now I don't know, with this tech we are not able to do real avatars, back then, how were you able to even think of it and let's do it like that? Like that's something interesting. Cool. So Microsoft happened 10 years. Uh, now from cleaning a room, now you are leading global teams at Microsoft. Why did you leave Microsoft?
So Microsoft, I think as I said, I went through a lot of products which I cared so much about and was very passionate about. And after the Avatar ones, I think I just said, I think I was 9 years there at that time, and I said, I just need to change. Like I need to change, and more or less because I still, in my heart of hearts, knew that product management was so much more than what I'd experienced at Microsoft. I love Microsoft. It's such a great company, and I adore it, and I'm a big fan of it. But I just knew that there was more. And so when I left, I left, and I decided, look, I'm going to take a few months off, and I'm going to figure it out. And I'm going to next company, and I was still set on staying in Seattle at the time. I said, next company I work for, I want to make sure they really, really focus on product, and I want to learn a lot in true product. And it's an interesting story because I looked at the companies around, and I think I had my eye on T-Mobile and one or two other companies, and Expedia was at my doorstep. It was a 15-minute walk away, and I didn't even look at it. I didn't consider it at all because I'll tell you why. Because Expedia, I don't know how many of you know this, once upon a time was a spin-off of Microsoft. Yeah, so I assumed it's going to be the same.
Oh.
So it was one day. I remember I had a happy hour drink with one of my friends who used to work with me at Microsoft. We used to have offices like diagonal to each other. Anyway, I had a few drinks with him, and we were talking about Expedia, and he'd been there for less than 3 months, and he was telling me, Pooja, I own this product space. I make sure that I really deliver on what we're trying to deliver and solve the products. I work with teams who are dedicated to my product. We work together as a team engineer, but I am the product person. And he would say all these things to me, and I just thought, he's been there for less than 3 months, honeymoon period. He's drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
So, but in the back of my mind, I thought, let me at least look into this. So I went through my network and I asked everyone, who do you know who works at Microsoft? And whoever knew somebody, they put me in touch with, and I talked to every single person. And they all told me the same thing. They were super happy there. They were really feeling a strong sense of ownership. They were moving the needle. And the other thing I heard was they had a CPO who recently joined them. And that chief product officer was very invested in, he had a Silicon Valley background, but very invested in really teaching great product to the rest of the team. And he had a very high bar. So I asked one of my friends, do you know anyone at, I'm thinking of now applying at Expedia. And he said to me, look, Pooja, actually I was contacted by a recruiter there. I can introduce you. I said, yeah, absolutely. So he put me in touch with her, and poor lady, I just harassed her. I said, please I sent her all the roles that I wanted to apply for, and I sent her my resume, this one, to the point where about 3 months later, she said to me, please don't call me, we'll call you. Because she was just tired of it. And I still remember her name, Karim. And I said, okay, fine. There was only one product role I didn't apply to. And so she said, look, I'm going to send your resume to every single hiring manager who's got an open role. And if anyone is interested, I'll get back to you. I said, okay, fine. So a week or two later, she gets back to me. It was the one role I hadn't applied for. And the only reason I hadn't applied to that role was because I had no idea what it meant. I looked at it and I was like, I don't know what this is. There's no way I can do this. And it was called the compulsion product manager.
What?
Compulsion.
Okay.
Right. So I had the same response. What is it? What is this? So anyway, they called me in front of I was so desperate to work at Expedia because of everything great I'd heard. I was like, fine, I'll go in for it. And I went in, and the way it used to work at Microsoft when you interviewed, I don't know if it still works this way, and maybe it works at Google and stuff this way, but you have a series of 5 or 6 interviews, and each interview you're going kind of a level up. And usually the last interview is with the most senior person, and you know that if that senior person doesn't meet with you, you already got no's from the people below you, so it's forget it, right? So that's what I assumed, because my experience for 9 years was with Microsoft.
Yeah.
So I went in for this full day interview, 5, and the last person I was supposed to meet was a CPO, and he canceled on me. They said, oh, sorry, he got pulled into a meeting. So I was like, okay, I didn't get it. So I thought, okay, tail between my legs, I went back home. In fact, I went to Vancouver because I was so depressed. So I went and saw my sister and her family. And I was sitting there and I get a message from Karim. And she's like, Pooja, they really like you. They want to meet you. The CPO wants to meet you. I said, okay, fine. So I said, can I come? Because now I just got into Vancouver.
Yeah.
And so I was ready to take a few days. She's like, no, come back tomorrow, whatever. So I went back, met with him. And he said to me, Pooja, you don't know what you're doing. Like what you said is garbage, but we really like the way you think. And we think that you basically can do this because the solution wasn't right. It was how I was approached. I was actually really keen to figure it out and understand it. And so I said, okay, let's do this. So they hired me and I did that. And I feel like that was very fortunate because that was his pet project in a way. He really wanted to create this idea. So who here knows what compulsion loops are? If you're gamers, you might. Okay, so it's this idea that you get, you guys have heard of addiction to a product. It's this idea of creating that compulsion into a product, creating that habit, that development, that addiction into a product. And you think about travel, and this is why it really confused me, because the only way I could think about doing it is through marketing, not through a product itself. And it's this idea of how do you get people using your product addictively when you're a travel product. So it was super interesting and challenging, and I learned a ton through that experience. But yeah, that was kind of how I ended up there.
I mean, now that term is gamification,
Yes.
very, very
Which
fancy
makes
term.
it makes me crow. I don't like that term, by the way.
I also don't like the term.
Yeah.
I hate it to the core. But tell us more about what is it like? How do you make people come back to your product again and again?
Yeah, so a lot of it is psychological, behavioral. So
Why would I come back to Expedia, let's say a product like a travel product?
okay, let me tell you how we started.
Yeah.
And of course, I know a lot of you guys have done the course at Unlearn, so you know a lot of this. But starting with really understanding user behavior before you even start building a product, right? So obviously, Expedia exists as a product. And we started to research why are people not coming back. Now, we started doing what we call ethnographic studies, which means it's a little creepy if you think about it. You're just sitting there watching someone do what they do.
Yeah.
So we go into people's homes and be like, let's watch you search for travel. Let's see what you do. And you start to observe patterns. And so we would notice people would search for travel. I'm going on a flight or whatever they're doing. And they'd take a piece of paper and they'd write it down. And then they'd look at another website, they'd write it down. And they'd look at another website, they'd write it down. And so I said, okay, so now they're writing it down. But they're not pulling the plug, right? They're just writing it down. And so we talked to them and asked them, well, what are you going to, what are you doing? Oh yeah, I got to check with my spouse. I've got to check with my friends I'm traveling with. I got to check with work to make sure I can take, this is going to work. And I also want to make sure, is this the best deal? Because it takes a lot of time to check and, maybe I'm missing something. So they would do something, I can't remember the exact numbers, but over 100 searches across over 40 different sites before they even made a booking. Yeah. So when you think about it from that perspective, and don't forget, this is in America, we focused our research, and in America, people take 1 or 2 holidays a year. So it's a big deal for them. They want to make sure they're getting the right thing. So we said, okay, if that's the case, how do we make it so that, if they're doing 100 different searches across 40 plus different sites, there's a good chance they're not coming back to Expedia to finish their booking.
Yeah.
So how do we make them come back to us, right? And that's where you start building in what are the things that are going to make it easy for them to come back to us. Now, this doesn't sound like rocket science because this is many, many years ago. But we introduced this idea of what we called Scratchpad as Scratchpad is kind of like a notepad. And Scratchpad was this idea where you could actually like a product and it saves. Just again, not rocket science. You guys do this all the time with your apps now. But back then it didn't exist.
I mean, can you come back?
Yeah.
Scratchpad.
Yeah.
What would I do at Expedia?
So let's say you're looking at a hotel or a flight. You could press the heart button and it saves to it says sign in, just like you would in an e-commerce site today. You save your list.
I think now it's very mainstream, but thinking at that time would be
At that time it was very not common.
Yeah.
And then what we did on top of that, okay, so we got you saving it. Now, and even before we actually did the saving function, to be honest, we looked at what did you look at and click on. And then we would remind you to come back and look at it. in 24 hours. And then we were always listening to our customers. They would complain and they'd say, you're spamming me. Why are you messaging me every day? It's too often. So we changed it to, okay, now what we're going to do is be responsive, I should say. So we say, okay, we're going to email you. If you open that email, that's our signal that you're interested. So we'll send you another email in 24 hours. If you don't open it, we'll wait for 3 days to send you the next email. So you start adjusting, right, your algorithm to the customer's response. And so that's where we started. And then we introduced the heart functionality and allowed you to set your triggers and all of that stuff. But that was kind of the beginning of how it all began and how we started to get more and more kind of really kind of the data element of really using the data to understand how we interact with each customer individually and personalize it. And at the same time, get them to do what we want them to do, which is come back and book with us. So it was a really great experiment and yeah, drove great business results.
I think now it's become the norm of every company.
It's the best practice now. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Even we do it.
Yeah.
But okay, so it was very weird to think, like you said, okay, Microsoft was not where I was learning product. But Expedia, I can understand why you think like Expedia made you a lot better in product and how you went into it. Now you are also leading, you're a director, you're senior director at Expedia as well. How did this transition happen from being a single PM, single product manager to being a director?
Yeah.
What changes in that whole journey of being a single individual contributor to now managing a team of product managers?
Yeah, it's a great question. I loved being a product manager. And I went kicking and screaming into managing people. What ended up happening was this one product I talked to you about turned into a platform which the entire company was using for making sure that they could drive customer behavior through notifications and all sorts of different triggers. So we built out this entire platform, and we at the same time we still had a marketing platform, a legacy system that our company was using. And our CPO realized that, that I was building this, my team and I, well, no, not my team at that time, it was my team as in my engineers and me and all of us, one small team was building this really great adaptive platform. And there was still a legacy platform that was sending spam essentially to users. So he basically pulled us all in a room and, said, listen, I need you to take over and kind of evolve this. But it was such a big undertaking. It was a team of about 100 plus people. He said, you're not going to be able to do this on your own, so you need somebody. And so I said, okay, fine, I know I'm not going to be able to do it on my own. So then I hired somebody. And to be honest, my first experience of working with somebody wasn't great, like having a direct report, because I hired somebody who didn't have the skills, but I thought I could teach them the skills. But they didn't have the foundational skills. So, and I needed somebody who could quickly get up and running. You sound like you can relate to this.
No, this is an internal joke that we have. I like in the mentor group and the people like incompetence become a very big.
Yeah.
But for a first time manager, how do you hire the first person that you want in your team?
Having learned what I've learned,
yeah,
I would say you really, really, really have to look at two things. One is, and probably more important than their competence and in the actual role, is their fit in the team and their fit from a cultural perspective in the broader organization, because product is such a critical role to kind of get things going, and stakeholders has to resonate with you. If you're going to rub them the wrong way, it's just going to be much harder. So somebody who you can really verify has that personality to deal with all sorts of different personalities, because let's face it, there are a lot of difficult personalities oftentimes when you work with a lot of people. That's, I think, the most critical thing. And then of course somebody who can show that, and again, depends what level you're hiring at, but somebody who can show they've got the proven experience, or if you're hiring someone very junior, shows that they've been able to take experiences they've never had before and turn them into successes, right? Like shows that they've been able to go into a new area or space and learn and grow and be hardworking and quick learning and apply what they know and humble enough to kind of take it on.
Okay, let's simplify this. Like,
Yeah.
if I am if I get into a product director role right now, and I have 0 people in my team, I want to hire, let's say, 2 to 3 people, right? And one person is a PM, 2 APMs. What should I look at to hire this PM in this? Uh, what are the qualities, like apart from product and everything? Like, what are the qualities you look at in these people, this person particularly that you want to report to you? Like,
Yeah.
what are the?
Look, for me personally, I want somebody who's responsive, accountable, really great attitude, right?
Mhm.
Like a lot of the more soft skills matter a lot more to me, but also the ownership, the high level of ownership, because again, product is at the core of a lot of stuff, and if you're not accountable for pushing it through, if you're not going to take ownership for pushing it through, you're not going to succeed in that role, and you're probably going to have to replace that person at some
How would you
point.
define ownership? Like, if I am, let's say, if I am a PM,
Mhm.
I'm working under you.
Yeah.
You just hired me for a role.
Yeah.
What do you expect me? What should I own? What is ownership for you? Like,
Yeah, so
what
for
should
me,
I own?
ownership is, let's say I give you even a feature, not even a full product, just a feature, that you are actually thinking, you're treating that feature like it is the most precious thing ever, and the success of that feature is the most precious thing in the world, which
Mhm.
means that you have to have the mindset that if it's a consumer facing feature, that you need to understand what the customer wants. You need to understand what problem it's solving. You need to be really skeptical about the product and make sure it's serving your end user to drive the success it's supposed to drive.
Do you want me to come back to you and say, okay, Pooja, I'm not able to do this. I don't know how to do this. Or would you want me to like say, Pooja, I'm not able to do this. I mean, let's say if I'm stuck at a blocker, like, and I'm just a new hire, right?
Yeah.
Would you want me to? Because see, I've also hired a lot of people,
Yes.
right? So I have had these experiences as well. In my experience, a lot of things that I see, people get really good at communicating, but for ownership for me would be like, if I hired someone, or if I mean, my expectation is like, if you have a feature, like you said, you go figure out whatever you needs to be figured out, and then don't come back and say like, I don't know what to do. But for you, is that the same thing, or how would you?
My
Because
thing
for
is-
me, like,
yeah.
training a person is very hard
Yeah.
at a job.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I cannot spend that much time.
Yeah.
But is that same across?
See, when you have a large team, right, you're going to get people at all levels with different levels of experience come in. So one mistake I see leaders make is they oftentimes don't put hierarchy in place because they think it creates bureaucracy. But it's really unfair to do that, because what happens is, let's say I have a 40-person team and everyone wants to report to me. I can't give everybody time and attention. I need to hire competent leaders below me who can who have the experience and skills that I trust have the experience and skills to then tell the people below them, or make sure they can support the people below them with the gaps they have, and then the people below them get supported by them. So like, I don't think there's anything wrong with 3 tiers of hierarchy, as long as it's serving to support your team. Now, it's not serving as a hierarchy. Now we have to jump through loops. I can never talk to Pooja. I can never talk to Rohan. It's not like that. You can come to me with anything. But I'm not going to be there to serve your granular needs of hey, I don't know how to write a user story. No, you should have a manager that helps you with that, right? Now, in my case, what I would say for me, door is open. Come to me if you can't figure something out. But if you come to me multiple times where you can't figure something out because you didn't even try to figure it out, that's where I draw the line.
Yeah.
Like, that's what I mean by ownership. Try what you can and come to me with the problems. And I'm always there to help and give you the right direction and everything. But ownership to me is just really saying, look, I'm going to try to figure this out as best I can. And of course, I'm going to ask for help when I can't.
Yeah. There's this term that I really like.
Mhm.
It's called high agency. Like,
Yeah.
you can you show agency to do something, and you eventually figure out things. Like, you just try doing things and you
Yes.
eventually figure out.
Yeah.
What are the traits? I mean, I bet you have worked with more than 100 plus people across in this span. like closely worked with a lot of people like this.
Mhm.
If you go back in this journey and look at the people you admired for their work ethic or the how they work and how good were they, how intelligent were they, can you figure out what are the key traits each of them had? Like, what was that like? Were they hardworking? What was,
Yeah.
if you can think of that?
Yeah, I categorize it into three things in terms of when I look at, because I do this consciously, I look at people who I've reported to, and as I've evolved as a leader, I identify what I really loved about reporting to them and what I really didn't like about reporting to them, and I try to adopt the traits I loved about working with them and apply that to my teams, and I try to avoid the things that I didn't like about them. And I think in time that's made me a better leader, because most leaders will have people working, like most leaders will have a consensus amongst people working below them about what they like and don't like about reporting to them. So I've done that. So that's one thing. And some of the traits I like there are lack of micromanagement, let me do my thing and be autonomous and then come to you when I need you. Full support, meaning like, whatever, I'll always have your back as a manager, and flexibility. I've always said, no matter where I've worked, whatever the policy is in the company, if you want to work from Timbuktu, go work, just get your work done, I don't care. So and that's how I like to be managed, that's how I like having leadership. So that's what I've tried to do, and if I were to wrap it up in those three things. In terms of peers,
that's something that you're giving as a manager, like
Yes.
these are the three traits. But what are you expecting from these
people who report to you? Yeah. In terms of people who report to me, the traits I look for, I don't look for working super hard in terms of long hours. I look for a few other things. I look for people who definitely work hard, and that goes with, I think, that high agency, like sense of ownership. You have this accountability towards what you own, and that's really important to me. The second thing is really about curiosity. I really like people who don't think they figured it out entirely, even if they have, but they're always willing and open to learn a new way of doing things. Because it's not about learning from me as a manager, because they also come back and bring so many new learnings to me. So I learn from them, because they're like, oh, you know what, I found out about this or that or the other. They're always coming with new perspectives, which is amazing. And then I think the other trait, which is almost the opposite of that, which I really like, is people who feel like they're not, like they just haven't done enough, like they've not learned enough yet. Then you look at how they do things and they're really doing it the wrong way.
Yeah.
And you know that we've hit a wall, or they're gonna, if they haven't hit a wall already, they're gonna hit a wall, or the company's gonna hit a wall as a result of those decisions.
Yeah.
But they just don't want to see it any other way. So that stubbornness, that idea of like, no, I know what I'm doing because I read 3 books on product management, therefore I got this, right? Or I have this title. Oftentimes you get inflated titles, so people suddenly think, oh, 2 years of experience and I'm a director, I got this, right?
Yeah.
That's the things that I look for, kind of trying to avoid, and just get people who are much more hungry, much more humble, try to kind of get in, and that also creates a really good team environment, because you feed off of each other when you're all like that.
Perfect. I have this one question now. So let's say when you are hiring a person, right? You don't know the person, so you have a bunch of resumes that you'll get from the HR, right? How would you go about? What are the things that you look at and say like, okay, these are the 5 people I want to interview, and see how they go about it? Because this high agency sense of ownership will be only after interview you get to know, right?
Yeah.
But things that you can judge from a resume. Yeah.
It's a good question. I think the resume one, you really have to look at sort of, 2 things. One, when they worked in a company, how long have they worked there? If you see a lot of job hopping, to me that's a bit of a red flag, because I just wonder, do they not know what they want, or have they not worked out in a company, or what's happened? Number 2 is what they actually write as their experience. You'll often see like people who sometimes, if they write product manager, I see this quite often. I've been a product manager, and then you look at the bullet points underneath it, and they're not product manager things.
Yeah.
Those are kind of like, okay, well, maybe you're saying you're a product manager, but you really were like a project manager, or whatever, which is great as well, but it's not for the role you're hiring for.
Yep.
And then I think when they can connect their deliverable, like whatever they delivered in the product, to not just the commercial impact it had, I drove revenues up by 30%, great. But actually, what was the user impact you had? What are the KPIs you drove that drove actual growth of usage?
Correct.
Those are things that I look for.
Do you think like people should not job hop a lot? Like they should at least work for 2-3 years in a company? What's your hypothesis on this?
Yeah, I feel like I'm a little old school. I'm going to say this because I've had my experience of working in it, and it's different for everybody. I work for a company, for example, Microsoft, where you could spend. I know people who've been there for 25 years, right?
Yeah,
like,
people
they've
retire.
had great careers there, right? So, I think if you're in a giant like that, you could absolutely potentially stay there for a long time and get a variety of different experience, and that still, raises your, grows your resume. I think when I left Microsoft, my idea was that was too long to be there. The next company I go for, I'm not going to stay for more than 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
I broke that rule. I stayed at Expedia for 6-7 years because I was having so much fun.
Yeah.
So I don't think there is a rule because the next company I went to, I stayed for a year. I wasn't super happy.
Do you
there.
think, what is the difference working in a company, big company like Microsoft, for a longer term versus a shorter term? Let's say if you work for 9 years, if I go work for 1 year, what is more impactful? Do you think like short term stints at a big company works?
I think short term, for me personally, my opinion, seeing a short term stint for a company like that, a year for like one of the FANG or one of the big giants, I would think that you couldn't cut it for some reason. Now, that would be my first instinct.
Mm-hmm.
But I would also wonder if, because these bigger companies also tend to be more political,
Mm-hmm.
it just takes one bad manager
Yeah.
for you to, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
there has to be a little bit of leeway there where you have to kind of understand it, because if the rest of the resume looks amazing, right? There could just be that one instance, and it's not their fault. It's just something that happened, and it happens to all of us at some point.
Yeah.
So I would still maybe pursue a conversation with them. I wouldn't just judge it on that one if they had a great resume otherwise.
Correct.
Yeah.
Let's say if you are working in Microsoft, right? Because a lot of products, a lot of things that you move, like in terms of metrics and KPIs, would be very long term. Like if you're working on a product in Microsoft, maybe one metric will move in 6 months or a year, right? So my hypothesis is like if you work short term, you just went there, didn't work a lot, and you haven't made a lot of big impact there, because it doesn't, in that span, you cannot make a lot of big impact.
Potentially.
Right?
Potentially. Yeah, that's why I say it could be two, like that could be the, but to me it boils down to what was the reason for you being there just a year. Of course you may not have made impact, but was it because you couldn't handle being in an environment like that, or was it just you had a bad manager or political situation or something? Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Coming back to your story, you went from Canada to Kenya to Canada again, and then in Canada to US again, and then US to Dubai, right? So we're coming to your Dubai story now.
Okay.
7 years in Expedia, then you moved to Careem. I think Careem was the biggest company in UAE at that time when you moved there. Why did you move there?
So for me, interestingly, as you probably got from my story so far, I never really planned my career. I just kind of go with what feels right. And I always said I'd love to live in Dubai one day. I first visited in the late 90s. I liked it then, even though there was nothing there. And then just for the hell of it, when I decided, so what happened was Expedia used to be a 15-minute walk away from me from my house. It was very convenient. Then they opened a big campus. It was going to take me an hour and a half to commute back and forth. And so I was like, forget this. I'm not doing that. If I'm going to commute an hour and a half, I may as well live somewhere else across the world. So I opened up my job. In LinkedIn, you can put I'm looking or whatever, open to new jobs. So I changed, and I put the countries I put were staying in the US. I put Canada, even though I knew Canada taxes are too high. I put England because London's always been like a second home for me. And I put Dubai just for fun, because I didn't think that Dubai was going to have tech. Like I was so far removed, I didn't think they had tech opportunities.
They only had oil.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, just for giggles, let's put it in there. So, and I did it in November, so I didn't expect there to be a lot of traction, because I didn't expect for people to be hiring till January, February, or October, November. Anyway, so then I got a lot of offers, interviews and offers, and I got 2 offers in Seattle, one in London and one in Dubai, which was Kareem. and I decided to take Careem. I had no idea who Careem was when they first reached out. Then I read up on them, like, oh, okay, they're owned by Uber.
Nice.
And moving across the world, far away from my family, etc., I felt good in the fact that the ex-CEO of Expedia is now the CEO of Uber, Dara. So I'd been working for Expedia when Dara was the CEO, and I saw how amazingly he ran the organization. So I felt, and I'd been with Expedia through multiple acquisitions as well. So I had some good faith that, okay, it's a good move to make. So that's kind of what informed my decision.
Right. Did you met Dara? Have you had a chat with him before?
Yeah, oh yeah. So Dara is a celebrity now. We used to laugh initially because he used to be in our, like, Expedia was, or I can't remember how many floors, but like we would bump into him in the elevator all the time. And Expedia, we used to have global product reviews every month. And in our global product reviews, every single C-suite member used to sit across the table from us, and we would tell them what happened last month, what we learned, what we're doing next month, and we'd go through this every month, a full day meeting with them. So yeah, multiple times he would sit across the table from us, and we'd bump into him in the elevator all the time. And I think before I joined Expedia, he used to play soccer. Like, he was very, like, he still is, I think, a very down-to-earth and, like, nice person. But then after he became the CEO of Uber, we used to see, like, Dara was spotted, like, getting on a plane, and we'd be like, did you see this? So it was kind of cool. But yeah, he's now a big celebrity.
I mean, let's dive deep into him, because a lot of people will resonate on this. Like, what did you think as a leader with Dara at that time? Not talking about now, because now everyone knows, everyone has a podcast about him. But at that time, when he was not famous, like, or whatever, what qualities stood out for you as a leader, like someone should have?
I mean, I'm somebody who never interacted with him much at all. Most of my interactions were with the product CPO and the CTO at the time a little bit. And of course, my direct peers and teams. But he was always around, and super humble, nice person, just good energy. Like, I honestly, I can't say anything bad. Like, I think when I joined Expedia, our stock price was at 30 something. And when I left, it was at 160 something. So
he knows some magic.
He not only that, I think as a leader, like, just this, he's very charismatic in a way. Like, what I noticed anyway, just a very charismatic yet approachable, just a very humble kind of person. And then I think what he did really well was he identified. So when I joined Expedia, he was not just the CEO of Expedia Group, but he was also the CEO of Expedia itself as a brand. So that's why we got a lot of exposure to him. And he hired just really great people to report to him, really great leaders that really knew their stuff and just really worked well together as a team. And I think that is really what contributed to the stock price also. Like, him being great leaders hire great leaders, and they let them do what they do best.
How would you define what is charismatic in a leader? Like, what is charisma?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if you can put your finger on it.
Yeah.
It's like an energy. I don't know. Like, I'm sure you guys have all met very charismatic people and leaders. And they walk in a room, and that they're just bringing this energy with them, and people are just drawn to them. Like, I don't know what it is. It's just it's this idea of not being too arrogant and being approachable, but just people just kind of want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. Got it. Cool. So before you came, I think we made a list. I think six of us were doing research and figuring out what should we ask Pooja. But I said, okay, let's see how much we can take this conversation forward. But I had this one very interesting question for you. You went to Careem. Careem is solving, I think when you moved, it was solving majorly transportation, and then moved into a super app as well, right? What are the major transportation challenges or that you see people have in UAE or Dubai?
It's interesting because Careem is regional, right? So we always used to look at the transportation challenges in the UAE versus other GCC countries. And that's kind of the angle I still look at it in. In the UAE, actually the challenges weren't as bad as somewhere like Saudi Arabia, for example, where roads still are not named on the maps apps. So if you're entering, and then they're not in English. So if you're visiting, imagine trying to put in where you're trying to go. In the UAE, it's relatively easier because a lot more most people speak English, right?
Mm-hmm.
And most of the names are in English as well.
Mm-hmm.
And on the maps, they are tagged, so you know exactly where to go. You know. But imagine there's some rural parts of India probably that are the same, where you're like, I remember coming when I was a kid to somewhere in India, and we're like, how do we get there? We roll down the window and like turn left over there and go right over there, and like, it's
I mean, these are second order effects that happened with maps coming into picture, like Google Maps. Uber was built because of that. Careem was built on top of it. One last question I have around this topic is like, do you see any current second order effect like this happening in the product space or in the startup or tech ecosystem? Like something that is happening maybe tomorrow, something better? Because see, I can tell you one of the hypotheses I have. Let's say if self-driving cars become a very mainstream thing, I sense that the biggest disruptor for them will be hotel chains, because now you don't have to stop if you're doing a long drive, right? So hotels, you don't have to stay in a hotel, right? So do you see any such thing happening with AI coming into picture, or something like Maps came in, like Uber was built on top of Google Maps, right? Something like with AI that you feel like, okay, something is going to change. Maybe we don't know yet as well, right? Because that's yet to happen.
I think AI is, I mean, obviously just as AI, interestingly, has gotten a lot of exposure recently because it's generative AI has become accessible, right, to everybody. But if you think about it, machine learning, all this stuff is all AI, is all a subset of AI anyway. And so it's been around for a long time, algorithms, all this stuff, machine learning. And I think really with the progression of AI, I think the biggest issue is going to be that, or my fear anyway, maybe it's unfounded, is because all the neural networks are kind of connected, the pace of AI is going to compound exponentially. And again, like what we see in sci-fi movies and stuff, eventually it's going to compound beyond what we can manage as humans. And that's my biggest fear. I can't think of a single use case like you just gave me off the top of my head. But I just
maybe we don't know yet.
Something
might come. Yeah. Maybe next time we're chatting, we would have something.
We'll have better ideas.
Cool. I'll wrap up with the last two questions.
Okay.
A lot of people here are PMs or are getting into PMs, but you started your career in 2000, like let's say 20-ish years. Still, there's no formal education for becoming a product manager. So if someone who's listening to this, who is 21 years, just out of college, who wants to get into product, what should they do?
They should do Unlearn.
Nice.
I think that, look, it's always a good idea to try to intern as a product manager, so you can get the feel of it. You have to also be very honest with yourself and ask yourself why you want to be a product manager. It's not a walk in the park. You have to have a lot of thick skin. We always used to say, when you're working as a product manager in a company, when things go wrong, you take the bullets, you stand in front, you say, yes, okay, it's my fault, or just leave my team alone, I'll take it. And then when things go right, you push your team forward and they get the glory. So it's not for everyone. Oftentimes when people would come to me and say, I want to be a product manager from a different discipline, I ask them why. And a lot of times they would say, because I want to make all the decisions, but that's not what you do as a product manager. It's actually a lot. It's just a lot of making sure people know what they're talking about and doing a lot of the research around it and presenting the decisions. So just being honest with yourself about why you want to do it. And then I think what you're doing, to be honest, Unlearn is really a great avenue to really get your, dabble in it and really understand what product management is, what some of the key skills are you need to learn, and as much product, and mentorship you can get as well.
Okay. Do you think mentorship helps? Like, not just for people who want to get into product management, let's say for founders, like who are just starting out, or let's say for anyone mentorship. Do you think mentorship helps?
100%. I think mentorship is everything. I don't think I could have grown in my career without mentorship. It's such a critical thing, and again, with product management especially, because it can be a very lonely place to be. You know, oftentimes there's one product manager and a team of engineers and a few UX people. You're the sole person. It's very important to have that support system.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll have to take last question because I was
It's the last question.
I was asked to take this question. We met because of Taruna. Taruna,
Yes.
if you're listening this, thank you so much for getting us here. You run multiple. You are advising a lot of companies in MENA region, right? Or you are also having a MENA women product group as
Yes.
well right now.
Yes.
What are you doing there?
It's a great segue from mentorship, actually. So the MENA Women Product Managers Guild is really just a community for female product managers to connect. We do one-to-one mentorship matching. We do mentoring circles where we do smaller group dinners and we just kind of get to know each other and talk about topics that they don't get to talk about in general because, again, it's very isolating in a way. And women, unfortunately, as product managers in the MENA region especially, are very underrepresented. So just a community to really kind of make sure everybody understands they have a support system. It's a free community. We do things sponsored, whatever we can do to kind of bring the women together and have meaningful conversations where they feel they can really truly connect with one another and have somebody on the end of their phone when they're like having a bad day or just need some advice or whatever.
I mean, one thing that I'll say is like just having any positive impact on people is like something really great. So great job there.
Thank you.
And one last thing is you're doing products as well, right? Products. What's the vision with that? What are you doing with that?
So I think I was just talking to somebody about this earlier. So one of the things I realized in the roles I took in MENA was that product management is just not a really well understood profession there. Less so, I think, than anywhere else I've lived or been exposed to. So one thing I wanted to do was there's a lot of tech investment still going into technology products in the MENA region, but a lot of them are failing because they don't have the right product approach. They're just kind of building feature factories.
Yeah.
And so I decided that I want to actually have a broader impact. And what I do is I like to describe myself as a bumblebee and try to pollinate different startups, scale-ups, even larger corporations with really great product practices. So they have a better chance at success so that the investments actually get to be fruitful.
Amazing. Perfect. I think it was scheduled for an hour. But yeah, people are getting restless because they have to work and present tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, get rest.
So they'll go and work. But Pooja, thank you so much for doing
Thank you so much.
this.
Thank you for having me. I hope I didn't bore you guys too much with my story.
No, it was really fun. One last thing, guys, you have to present to Pooja tomorrow, so make sure you do your best. And
I'm sure you will do.
Yeah.
Amazing.
All the best. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for
Absolutely.
having
Thank
me.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this.